Hi, welcome back to Viral Shakespeare. This is Dr. William Jones from Murray State University, and it's been a while since I've done one of these. And it was during the height of the pandemic that I was putting these videos onto YouTube talking about various Shakespeare plays for the benefit of my classes at Murray State University. But since then, now that we've gone back into the classroom, I want to use this forum in a different way. I've thought about retitling these videos, if I'm going to keep making them, not Viral Shakespeare, but resounding Shakespeare or resounding Shakespeare, looking at those moments from our current historical period that have these resonances, these resoundings with a Shakespeare play, and vice versa, the way that the Shakespeare plays seem to be in conversation with modern events, the way that modern events seem to be in conversation with Shakespeare, and what they can say about each other. From a literary critical standpoint, I guess this is known as presentism, where you look at present events and you think about the historical past through the lens of the present, but I'm more interested in a kind of dialogic perspective on this. What can the Shakespeare plays and the corresponding modern events tell us about each other? What kind of dialogue can they engage in, or are they engaged in? So I thought I would use this time, just little short 10-15 minute videos, to talk about these things when they occur, when they pop up. And the one that I want to talk about now is Macbeth and Will Smith's act of violence at the 2022 Oscars, where he slapped Chris Rock across the face on camera during the event itself. Now, I'm doing this quite a number of months after that event, so there really is nothing more trite than continuing to talk about this, or to have one more amateur psychologist assigning blame. You know, this person was right, this person was wrong, this is the reason behind it, this is the consequence of it. We have to understand the psychology of this, we have to understand the social circumstances of that. I'm not equipped for that, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not here to assign blame, I'm not here to analyze psychology. What I am here to do is to talk about how there are so many resonances between that act of violence on that stage in 2022 and the play Macbeth. So the title of this video is not Viral Shakespeare anymore, or even Viral Shakespeare Macbeth. It's Macbeth and Will Smith, Thanes of Cawdor. How Macbeth actually won the 2022 Oscars. I'm going to step outside what I usually do here, where these videos are a little bit more freewheeling, where I have a script kind of in my head, but I don't actually read. I want to read a few things to begin with here. And I want to, again, reiterate what I'm looking for here in this discussion is the subject of echoes. The echoes of Macbeth that I saw in that act of violence by Will Smith against Chris Rock, involving Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, during that event, the echoes between that and the play Macbeth, and then the echoes between that act and Macbeth. Not again trying to figure out why this act of violence in 2022 occurred, but more looking at the kind of dialogue that's happening, the things that that event in our own time can tell us about the play that maybe we haven't considered strongly enough or sufficiently enough, or that the issues that affect Macbeth in this fictional presentation from the 17th century continue to influence events, or to have a dialogue with events in 2022. So I'm going to step away from what I usually do, and I'm going to read a few notes that I have written down here, again, with the idea of resoundings, with the idea of resonances here. So not going to assign blame, not going to talk about psychology. That's just trite. It's past. That's not my point here. Smith's assault on Rock, however, did show, among other things, the speed of modern media and the speed with which modern media can turn what seemed to be at the time a pretty significant cultural event. It can turn it away from a serious discussion about topics ranging from race and class and gender and economic privileges to people just sniping at each other online from the safety of their own silos. But within all of this, one factor that has been largely overlooked, I think, and I understand why, certainly, are the resoundings, the resonances between, as I said, that act of violence that evening and the circumstances in a film that did not win during the 2022 Oscars. At least it didn't win Best Picture, but its presence is all over the events of violence that occurred that evening, and perhaps it should have won. And in fact, maybe it actually did win, because it was so present, even if unspoken, because of that act of violence. And I'm talking about the tragedy of Macbeth, directed by Joel Cohen, starring Frances McDormand and Denzel Washington. So although it was Smith's leading role in the film King Richard, a fictional account of an ambitious, controlling father, the father of tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams, that's the film that brought him honor, Smith, as Best Actor that evening. However, it was Macbeth, interestingly enough, and not the movie King Richard that was in direct dialogue, I think, or maybe an unspoken dialogue, with Smith's actions that fateful evening. A closer look at Macbeth, it seems, helps pierce through the veil of the dunnest smoke, as it's described by Lady Macbeth in the play, that obscures the complexity behind Smith's assault and a similar complexity behind the violence and the reasons behind the violence that we see in Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy. Taken together, both of these things, both the fictional literary event of Macbeth and the act of violence of 2022, they have much in common in this kind of hydra-like nature of ambition, privilege, fear, trauma, violence, masculine honor. All kinds of themes seem to intertwine themselves between Shakespeare's play and that act of violence. So let me set up the first scene here, and this is one of the resonances that really struck me between the performance of Macbeth in its original time of 1605, 1606, and the Oscars themselves of 2022. So I'm going to read a little bit more here. Imagine yourself here at the court of King James I of England and Scotland in the summer of 1606. 7 months earlier, on November 5th, 1605, James had narrowly survived an attempt by a group of Catholic conspirators to blow up both him and the entire assembled Parliament, the so-called gunpowder plot. A mere 5 months earlier, the treasonous conspirators had all been tried, condemned, and executed in the most brutal way possible, and their leader, Guy Fawkes, took it upon himself before he could be executed to leap from the ladder that was leading him to the gallows, the rope already around his neck, and killed himself right there on the spot. Public sentiment galvanized around King James in the wake of the gunpowder plot and these trials and executions, in the wake of his miraculous salvation and Parliament's miraculous salvation, and God's divine favor surely required some kind of celebration. And so Guy Fawkes Night is born, and it is still treated today as a kind of festival of public thanksgiving, with music and fireworks and effigies set aflame and drinking and merrymaking and all kinds of things. Even though a lot of people in England still don't quite understand what's behind Guy Fawkes Day, that's really it, this sort of public celebration of Thanksgiving, of this miraculous celebration. Now, just a few months later, in the summer months of 1606, another very public demonstration of nationalistic pride, coupled with a kind of frenzy against Catholicism, James turns to another kind of public event to celebrate his supremacy, to celebrate his legitimacy. He welcomes his brother, King Christian of Denmark, to England to enjoy a royal festivity at one or more of his own opulent palaces, perhaps Hampton Court or St. James's Palace or Whitehall. This was one of James's so-called royal masques, and James loved royal masques. And when you think about it, at the end of the day, there isn't a whole lot of difference between a royal masque and the Oscars, such as it was in 2022. Just like Oscar celebrations held in Hollywood, King James's royal dignitaries donned their most show-stopping outfits, they rode to the palace in their most splendid carriages, and they basked in the presence of other privileged nobility, surrounded by assistants and agents and publicists and stylists and handlers and go-betweens, the so-called, caterpillars of the Commonwealth, as Shakespeare wrote in Richard II, pouring honey into the ears of those who were willing to accept it, not unlike perhaps the weird sisters in Macbeth, striding down their own various red carpets. Everyone at the masques, like everyone at the Oscars, is absolutely fully confident that the entertainments that they are about to be witness to, that they have come to enjoy, would be absolutely lavish. This lavish celebration of their own, for lack of a better term, legitimacy, call it superiority, call it cultural power, social influence, whatever you want to call it, in both the Oscars and in James's royal masques at his palace in the summer of 1606. There would be dancing, there would be music, There would be spectacle. There would be lavish costumes and a very sort of self-congratulatory air, all to show how deserving the people at the Oscars and the people at King James's Masks are of the adulation of Hollywood royalty and of Stuart royalty. And again, coincidentally, part of the entertainment for the night, both in 2022 at the Oscars and in 1606 in James's Royal Masque, is Macbeth. It's Macbeth. And for King James's celebration in the summer of 1606, having Shakespeare's play put on in front of visiting nobility in full spectacle would be a very ideological political act. This 11th century Scottish king, we're talking about Macbeth here, was projected as the kind of eternal enemy of James's family. James traces himself back to another character in Shakespeare's play, another historical figure, Banquo. And Banquo was murdered by Macbeth, or on Macbeth's orders. And therefore, putting on a play about the victory of Banquo, albeit Banquo was killed during the play, as part of this celebration of the legitimacy and the power of James, is an intensely ideological act. Now, Macbeth in the Oscars is perhaps less politically resonant as it would be for James's Royal Masque, and yet it is still part of this self-congratulatory statement of legitimacy and power in 2022 cultures. Now, during the Oscars themselves, we all know what happened. I don't really think I need to talk about it really that much from what we saw. Chris Rock told this joke that he couldn't wait to see Jada Pinkett Smith in G.I. Jane 2, referring to her baldness, which he may or may not have known is the result of a disease that she suffers from called alopecia. Will Smith apparently laughed initially at the joke, then supposedly Jada Pinkett Smith gave her husband a deeply disapproving look. There's also these sort of very, very specious reports of her grinning after her husband's assault on Chris Rock, like a sort of evil Eve having tempted Adam to do this terrible act and then glorying in the way that she could manipulate her husband. I don't buy that, but apparently she gave Will Smith a disapproving look. Smith then stopped laughing, reacted, took to the stage, assaulted Rock, finally going back to his seat and telling Chris Rock to keep his wife's name out of his effing mouth on more than one occasion. Some reactions were swift, some less so, although online, of course, the condemnations and commentary came incredibly quickly. But Smith apologized for the assault on March 29th. Smith resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences on April 3rd, and he was banned from all Academy events for 10 years on April 8th. That's the whole thing. As I've just stated, some of this really fits into this narrative, at least in some commentaries online, of the so-called evil woman, the femme fatale. And Lady Macbeth fits into that as well. Earlier criticism of her depict her as just this demonic creature in league with the darkest forces, willing to drag her husband down to hell to get what she wants, to force him to kill Duncan so that they can achieve the throne and they can wield power together. And she does it through manipulation of her weak husband. A sort of seduction, perhaps on the one hand, on the other hand, an appeal to his masculine honor, saying, basically you don't have any of that. If you don't kill Duncan, you are not a man. It is very easy to keep both Jada Pinkett Smith and Lady Macbeth in that particular box. They are simply the evil women who manipulate their weak husbands to do the acts of violence that they do. It's extraordinarily easy. It's also extraordinarily surface and extraordinarily facile. But I'll dive into this for just a second here in the play itself. Lady Macbeth, before her husband arrives, after she has read the letter, in Act 1, Scene 5, mentions that she really is quite concerned that Macbeth will not do this act of violence because he is, quote, too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Does this fit in with anything with regard to the Smiths. Well, I don't know. Will Smith's biography talks about how he was always concerned about being a soft rapper, that he didn't have the credibility that's often given to the harder rappers, the harder artists, the people who have a more challenging background, that he was in some way softer and more privileged. And he himself has talked about the fact that he felt he needed to kind of push back against this idea that he isn't hard, that he is in fact soft, i.e., far too privileged, or in the case of what Lady Macbeth is saying, far too kind. She's very concerned that Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness, and so he needs to be prodded. He needs to be pushed. As she says, "Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thy ear, and chastise with the valor of my tongue," or with Jada Pinkett Smith, the power of her eyes, apparently, "and chastise with the valor of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal." So, that one seems pretty cut and dried, and when she's talking to her husband, again, she apparently goes with this appeal against his softness, that he needs to be hard. If he doesn't do that, he is not a man. Is this toxic masculinity? You could frame it that way. Is it masculine honor? You could frame it that way. Is there much of a difference between the two? That's a whole other question. The idea of, for Macbeth, remaining this image of hardness, that he's still the guy that during the wars could cut a guy right down the middle with his broadsword and continue to fight some more. To maintain that image, to maintain that level of political and social power. Is that what drives him? For Smith, is it not wanting to appear soft? Is that what drives him? So Lady Macbeth responds to Macbeth himself, saying in Act 1, Scene 7, "Prithee peace," says Macbeth to his wife. Stop talking about this. Don't call me a coward anymore, as she says in the previous speech. Don't say I am afeared. I am full of fear. Don't cast me as a person who doesn't have any masculine honor, any masculine valor. Prithee peace, I dare do all that may become a man, says Macbeth. Who dares do more is none. So I am a man. I have done what I need to do to be a man. If you want to drive me to kill Duncan, that makes me a monster. I'm not going to do it. Her response is, "What beast was it then that made you break this enterprise to me?" Pointing out, you're the one that brought this up, which is true. "When you durst do it," in other words, why are you blaming me? You brought this up. You put this idea of killing Duncan moving forward with this political assassination plot into my head. That was you. What happened to that guy? Don't blame me as the woman. You did this. "When you durst do it, when you dared to do it, then you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. Nor time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make both. They have made themselves, and that their fitness now does unmake you." She then moves on to bash him in an astonishing moment that often gets people attention, their critical attention here. She says to her husband, "I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this." Now, on the one hand, again, it's quite easy to look at her and say, oh, well, she's just coming at him as being not hard. She is knocking his masculine honor. She is emasculating him as a way to drive him to this violence. That just makes her a typical Eve, a seducing, evil female that wants to drag men down. But there's something embedded in that speech that we need to pay attention to, and that's the issue of trauma. We don't exactly know what Lady Macbeth's trauma is, nor did perhaps Chris Rock know what the trauma that Jada Pinkett Smith was suffering from her disease, from alopecia and other things. We do not know the other traumas in Will Smith's life, the abusive household he seems to have come from, and other traumas that he has suffered that drive him toward this idea of remaining hard rather than appearing soft. We don't know the traumas, but Lady Macbeth, she nods to it a little bit. she makes it a little bit visible, like Jada Pinkett Smith's the evidence of the disease that she's been suffering from for a long time and everything that comes with that suffering, that trauma. She says, I was a mom. I have given suck. I know what it is to love the babe that milks me, and I would rather kill that baby than act in a cowardly way like you have. Where is the baby? Where is it? Are the Macbeths older? Has the baby grown up and moved out? Has it older? Did it die young? Some people say Lady Macbeth killed it. There's no evidence of that. The baby's gone, though. The baby is just not present. Hang on one second. So we do know one thing. She has suffered trauma in that. She's a mother who does not have her child. Something has gone wrong. Is it that trauma that drives her to attack her husband that way? Is this part of her psychology? Is trauma part of Jada Pinkett Smith's emotions that drive or drove the events of that night? We can't know. It's a subtextual experience. But to blame them and call them evil, whichever woman you're talking about, means you have to disregard the potential for that trauma. We see it in Lady Macbeth. We see it in 2022 at the Oscars. I do not want to label Lady Macbeth evil. There's another famous scene that supposedly proves what an evil woman she is, using her evil powers, whether it's the gaze or whether it's some sort of, demonic power, where she prays in Act 1, Scene 5. She prays to the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts to, quote, unsex me here. Unsex me here. Don't make me a woman anymore, and fill me from the crown to the toe tupful of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts, and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers. Again, another reference to her nurturing side. She would not need to make this prayer, Lady Macbeth, if she wasn't also very, very concerned about the fact that she herself is too full of the milk of human kindness, whether as a human, whether as a woman, whether as a mom who isn't a mom anymore. She is concerned that she has this goodness in her. She does not want this goodness in her. She's trying to get rid of it. And yet, does she ever fully get rid of it? Will she be tormented by her actions? And the answer, of course, is yes. She says later in the play that she couldn't even kill Duncan. She'd have done it herself, but he looked like her father. So she had someone else do the act. She was held back by something in her own psychology that would not let her do it. Does that make her a monster? I tend not to think not. It tends to make her human. Much later in the play, when she sleepwalks, we see that torment come out again. While she's sleepwalking and washing her hands, this is Act 5, Scene 1, where she says the famous line, out, damn spot, out I say, 1, 2, why then 'tis time to do it. Hell is murky. Fie, my lord, fie, a soldier and afeard. What need we fear? Who knows it? When none can call our power to account. Yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him? And then she gives the most earth-shattering sigh or cry that you can ever imagine as a kind of an acknowledgement both of the action that she has spurned on and the trauma that took her to it, however subtextual that is, what we do not have access to. Could Chris Rock have been a little bit like the witches in this scenario, wittingly or unwittingly touching on an already exposed nerve, dangling a blade before wounded spirits like the witches do, like may have happened in 2022, again, knowingly or unknowingly, hanging that dagger of the mind from Act 2, Scene 1 in Macbeth before people whose trauma we do not know and cannot have access to. Yet we are so quick to condemn all parties involved. And that may be simply the wrong approach. Let's see. I did want to mention that there are a couple of different avenues that one can take after an act of violence like that. For Lady Macbeth, as I said, there's a certain amount of withdrawal that comes from her, and her conscience eventually takes over. The good part of her that she was trying to deny, she cannot deny, it takes over her, drives her mad. She will eventually be driven to her own act of violence against herself, which is truly, truly terrible, and the women in Castle Macbeth cry out against it. It is something that drives them to the worst kind of expulsion of grief that you can possibly imagine. It isn't something that people are happy about. In a modern movie, Die Hard, when Hans Gruber falls off the building and everyone goes, "Yay, yay! The villain is dead! Hooray!" The dragon is vanquished and the good prevails and all of that. You don't feel that with Lady Macbeth when she goes. The women in Castle Macbeth acknowledge that. That's one route that you can go, that kind of self-torment. Macbeth himself also has self-torment, but he also tends to go a bit toward more nihilism. Suddenly he cannot sleep, as it says in Act 2, Scene 2. Macbeth shall sleep no more. Is Will Smith tormented? Can he sleep no more? I don't know. We can never know. But we know that in the actions that he took, the apologies, the resignations, the bannings that he accepted, there's a certain amount of contrition there. It feels a little bit like King Lear, who acknowledges that he did something wrong when he finally wakes up and says to his wrong daughter Cordelia, "If you have poison, I will drink it. Like, I did wrong. I understand that." Or perhaps a bit like Othello, who also realizes he has done terrible wrong in his own act of violence, in killing his wife Desdemona. And he takes the route of not wanting anybody to tell any lies about him, that he has in fact done this, that he acknowledges his guilt here. "When you shall these unlucky deeds relate," says Othello, "speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down anything aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely, but too well." Of someone who loved not wisely, but too well. Does that speak of anything that we can say about the events in Oscar night 2022? Of people who do love wisely, of a man who loved too well, but not necessarily too wisely, and did an act of violence. Did it come from a place of love? Not a place of toxic masculinity, not a place of of masculine honor challenged, of manipulation from an evil Eve-like figure. Could it come from a place of love? Like apparently it does from Othello. I think that that's something that we should certainly think about. Macbeth also has another route once he realizes that there is no atonement, that he is going to be tormented, but he does have a certain amount of privilege and a certain amount of safety. People aren't going to necessarily be able to go after him for Macbeth. It's been prophesied that nobody can kill him except someone who's not born of woman, or until the woods get up and move. And as it turns out, those things do happen. He is, in fact, vulnerable, although he doesn't actually realize it. Are Hollywood royalty equally invulnerable until the point where they're not? Also possible. But another option for the Smiths, I don't think they're doing this, is to turn to nihilism, a lack of belief in anything, the way that Macbeth does, as a kind of alternative to a conscience that's going to continue to torment him. Act 5, Scene 6, the famous speech after he hears that his wife has died. "Tomorrow," he says, "and tomorrow, and tomorrow," creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time. "And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. Life, is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." It's not a great option. None of them are great options. That kind of belief in nothingness, that nothing matters. Will it soothe one's conscience? Will it take off the guilt? Will it make one less vulnerable? I don't know. I don't think so. But there are so many resonances between the consequences of an act of violence, the kind of spurring event behind an act of violence, and the whole question of what it means to be a creature driven by traumas, some of which we can see, some of which we can't. And how quick we are, as critics of this play, as social critics of things that happen in popular media or popular culture, our desire to label things quickly and to judge quickly and then to move on and to sit in our silos and be happy and not accept that there are complexities, some of which we can know and some of which we can't. More of these, hopefully, to come. I hope you enjoyed it.